Okay, this is going to be a multi-parter, and so you may want to get comfy, grab a coffee, grab your vice, whatever it is, bucket of popcorn, the needed essentials. As usual, at the end of each one, and they may end abruptly, I apologize preemptively, but it will be in your top left-hand corner. This is based on scientific news. Scientific news. Science is that credible thing that we use that Caucasians have developed to an incredible degree here to explain the world around us and all facets of which and how they work together. And I've shown in a lot of my works that what you're taught or what we're basically led to believe might be a little bit different than the way things worked out originally in a lot of different facets. And I could go off for an hour on that at least, and you all know it's true, so let's drop that topic or that line and go with another one. What we're looking at here is an ancient cave said to have been painted by Cro-Magnon. There are quite a few famous ones, this being a major one. Shows a lot of animals that are in it of the time, cows and so on. And what people don't get out of some of this art, other people do. And it's amazing over a period of time what some people have been able to deduce out of this. For even some of the major artists of our time, when visiting the caves, made the expression that the incredible artists of Renaissance and all had really created nothing. For they had artistic representation, depth, abstract thoughts, all kinds of things. And then you also see things like, well, let me just break this down for you real quick. This sweeps around here in a loop. Sweeps around here in a loop. And it's pretty amazing. One amazing thing is you can see this person standing here. So whenever they were drawing this, these people were giants. Well, that's one deduction. Or they were standing on somebody else's shoulder or standing up on something, be able to reach high points like this and this and draw things. Something else you could deduce from this is that they have a good, reasonable facsimile of the animals, but then there also are dots that are shown here and shown here, and people have figured out that they have some type of zodiacal astrotheology going on here, and this is a representation of a swish of somewhat like the Milky Way, and the animals that are in heaven, perhaps that they have killed or have sustained mankind since recorded time, and like Brother Bear, whenever they show you the Aurora Borealis and the animals going through and something, this is a situation like that. Imagine that. Give it that levity. But also imagine that on the shoulder here of the bull Taurus, that there is a representation of the Pleiades right at its shoulder, and this is Orion. And there are other things around here that show you that they had a lot more going on than people thought up until a recent time. And by recent time, I mean in the last 10 years. What I was saying 10 years ago is now been eclipsed. And I thought I was pushing the envelope by trying to mention certain things. When you're in academia, you really can't push the envelope very much, but we're going to try to do so along with this article, because the article itself is doing so. It's kind of showing you, okay, well, we thought this back then, and you know, Copernicus came along and stuff, and Galileo, and things happened, and we got more of a figuring out of things. And I've showed you that people knew a lot and way back in older times, and you can't credit everybody with everything that gets credited for certain things. Not to take anything away from them, because it is the same people that are doing it, and that quite often they stand on the back of giants like somebody stood on the shoulder of a giant and painted this painting that's here. So let's just get into it before I go off again, because I could just ramble. The starting statement, opening statement, is scientists claim Cro-Magnon DNA fully modern. Let that sink in. Scientists claim that they've done DNA sampling of Cro-Magnon man, and his DNA is fully modern, unchanged for 28,000 years, and it and other factors have disproved the out of Africa claim. It just shows that it's somewhat different. And we're going to get into this later, so let's just leave that hanging and understand that years ago they've gotten to this point. This is a 5-year-old article. This is nothing that's brand new, but it may seem brand new to some. In 1950, the United Nations Educational, Science and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, issued a statement asserting that all humans belong to the same species and that race is not a biological reality but a myth. This was a summary of the findings of an international panel of cultural anthropologists, geneticists, sociologists, and psychologists. Effectively, what they were trying to say at this conference is like that we're all variations on a theme of the same thing. And I think we can probably realize that that's truth and reality. But whenever you taxonomy creatures, you get a different way of interpreting it than you do if that creature ends up being us analyzing ourselves. It subconsciously is taken by the quest for certain people's agenda to fit under a certain paradigm in a certain way. But over changes, and not really changes in reality or history or what happened, but in science, you start to deduce different things. Easy example. We didn't have the idea of the atomic bomb idea until the E equals mc squared. 100 million years ago, E equals mc squared was a reality of the cosmos. No one was able to do anything with it. No one knew it existed, but it existed. Along came a person that figured it out in the relation to things, and we were able to do something with it. Those are two different things too. Somebody figuring it out, and then other people going, you know, what we could do with that. Create unlimited energy, and somebody says, yeah, well, you know what? Sounds like a firecracker to me. So, ways of doing things, because you can harness that same energy in a different way. You can power a bunch of towns, or you can mow them down, right? Effectively. So, I don't know at what point to get into taxonomy more. I'm going to say I'm going to leave this for the next time that it comes and rears its head up, and it's going to happen. So let's continue. Now this was back in 1950s or whatever, but many new scientific discoveries have been made just since the 1950s, especially in the field of genetics, indicating that humanity does not share the same ancestry and is in fact a hybrid species, not one single race, but we're still pushing that one thought. It's seen in a lot of different ways, and at the end of this I will go into it. DNA evidence shows that ancient humans rampantly, and I disagree with that, interbred and indulge with an interracial cross-species sex with multiple sub-races of different creatures, including mystery DNA in modern Africans, neither human nor Neanderthal. and not found in non-Africans. Well, this is just one aspect of it. In fact, in that, there's a whole lot. Let me get into it this way. It doesn't show that there's rampantly inbreeding or interbreeding, but articles have come out recently, and this fits me very well in what I've been trying to show, is that there's this ancient time whenever something, not what we've turned it into, but something very similar to these elves and humans and some giants and these people, Middle Earth, Mediterranean, and things that were going on a long time ago. And it's kind of strange how it all goes together, but there were some different races, and you would try to pin things on, and you know that there are hobbit creatures now that we know in floras, in pygmies in Africa. So you could say, well, then there's your little hobbits. In fact, they use that name. And then somebody that's burly and a dwarf that's a little smaller than the other ones, I guess, is going to be a Neanderthal. But looking at Neanderthals, they range and look, a little more robust, if you will, and a little more stocky, if you will, and not as stretched out compared to some others, like humans, or like elves, or whatever. But then there's the taller version of that, and in D&D, it would be the humans, and comparative to the smaller things, that's a giant. But then in D&D, they fight giants. So we kind of know what we're talking about in that little thing, and I don't want to go all off on D&D and mythical creatures, for we're trying to talk about reality and science. But what they're saying in that statement, too, is that there's been different breeding in between Homo sapiens and its variations with other creatures. And there's Denisovans not mentioned here, but Neanderthals. And also there's a missing component been found in sub-Saharan Africans. Whenever it says Africans here, it's kind of a misnomer where they've put that label on there, but all of North Africa and East Africa was always Caucasians. The Egyptians were blue-eyed Caucasian people, so on. So what they're saying is that there's this mystery DNA, what they call a ghost species, that's still found, that's just like a Neanderthal, but it's found in sub-Saharan Africans. But they call it a ghost species because they haven't identified which one that is. They've identified the Neanderthal, and we're going to get into something they go into this on how much and what they identified of Neanderthal. But they haven't found this creature, so they can't really name it. People also have not been willing to take a shot at reality of it, and we don't actually have the variations of genetics of Homo erectus and its variations around too, and that might be a kind of key to misnomer. We have Denisovans, we have Neanderthal, and everybody basically other than sub-Saharan Africans all have this Neanderthal component and Denisovan components in them. Even Amerindians, Eskimos, everybody. Even the Islander people and Irian Jaya and Australian Aborigines. The one that doesn't have that are the sub-Saharan Africans, but they have their own thing. Perhaps what made them somewhat different, right? But then we look at other variations, and you can say, well, in India they have a lot more Denisovan in things, and that must be that variation on a theme that over time created that to be a separate entity than what you would see in an Oriental people. But then in an Oriental people, you have the island people that look like a blend of that and some Denisovan things. A lot of people, if you know, I'm just boring you probably by now about the concepts of differential that's going on. So let me step one more time, and then I'll go into another description. For here you will learn that there were at times different human species living simultaneously, each having their own physical characteristics and history, and now we know that all of those don't exist anymore, but they live on by having a small component in these other people. Just a little, but it's a little enough to make a difference. For way back when, there always had to have been a 50-50, which is definitely radical from either one, making a hybrid. And whether if it was just that one and then kept and then bred back into it and eventually everybody got some and it's smeared out to a small percentage or whatever. And so this rampant situation that they talk about doesn't seem so rampant. People are fighting now when they talk about it on whether it happened once or twice or a few different times. And what they really like to find is a lot of skeletons and get the DNA out of them and see, well, this one did this one that. Well, here's a Neanderthal Denisovan cross, and so did somebody breed with that, and that is the blend that goes with all these people over here in the East. Or does this happen, that happen? When does it happen? Scientific evidence refuting the popular theory of modern humanity's African genesis is common knowledge among those familiar with the most recent scientific papers on the human genome, mitochondrial DNA, and Y chromosomes. Regrettably, within mainstream press and academia circles, there seems to be a conspicuous, and dare we say it, deliberate vacuum when it comes to reporting news of these recent studies and their obvious implications. And that brings a myriad of thoughts to me, but it's kind of disturbing how the Discovery Channel is no longer the Discovery Channel and the History Channel is no longer the History Channel. MTV is no longer MTV. They don't play music anymore. What? It's just, they're showing shows about mermaids and stuff and trying to see if they can get you to believe it. And going off on far-flung concept. Is there still a megalodon? And while that's great during Shark Week, they try to pull it off in different ways. National Geographic itself said that they were no longer going to talk about genetics because it's racist. Yep, people grew up. Now I don't know if how old y'all are, but all the granddad days and stuff and everything, they would show people from all around the world and different societies and things that nobody ever knew you never knew. And they don't talk about it anymore because when it shows those people and it talks about them being primitive and stuff, that's racist because it's, you're the fancy people with the big language and the books and all the stuff telling people, so you're bad man. Sometimes reality is just reality. So looking at all those different reports, you start to see that maybe the idiom that was pushed on us as late here as the 1950s, coming out of the thoughts that came from Darwinism, became something different than even what Darwinism, if you look into what he said, proposed. Australian history, Greg Jeffries explains that the whole Out of Africa myth has its roots in the mainstream academic campaign in the 1990s to remove the concept of race. When I did my degree, they all spent a lot of time on the Out of Africa thing, but it's been completely disproved by genetics nowadays, and mainstream still holds on to it and teaches it. You can see variations on a theme even in what they try to say and explain depending on their fields. And this shows you that it has a flimsy thing, and again, it's a theory, and it always was. The academics most responsible for cementing both the Out of Africa theory and complementary common ancestral African mother given the name of Eve in the public arena in nearly every curriculum were Professors Alan C. Wilson and Rebecca L. Cann. And there's actually a series that goes through that, and somebody wrote a whole long thing, longer than I'm going to talk about today, on just that aspect. But in their defense, the authors of this paper were fully aware that genealogy is in not any way linked to the geography, and that their placement of Eve in Africa was an assumption and never an assertion. In other words, because of the theory, they tried to place her somewhere in East Africa, saying that it all spread from there, and then somehow Bantus came from that, and all the Caucasians that we know came from that, and a variation of theme broke off of that and became the Amerindians, Eskimos, people of India, the variations of Orientals, and all of this situation. And opening genetics would kind of show something like that, and that there was a Neanderthal integration out of here. But then how do you get Neanderthal? Time out. How do you get Neanderthal? How do you get these different things to pop up like popcorn? So let that stew around for a minute. A very recent paper on Y chromosomes, published in 2012, re-examining the out of Africa theory and the origin of Europeoids or Caucasians in the light of DNA genealogy, only confirms the denial of any African ancestry in non-Africans, and strongly supports the existence of a common ancestor who would not necessarily be in Africa. In fact, it was never proven that he lived in Africa. And basically what they're saying by that is that in this paper, they were confirming that the haplogroups that sub-Saharan Africans have aren't really derived from the Caucasians, or vice versa, and they don't have a direct connective. So it must go back before, and of course there's supposed to be evolution of haplogroups in situations, but it goes way back before that, and they have this common ancestor they're all supposed to be related to. But the common ancestor seems to be 1.2 to 1.6 million years ago, and then different things happened out of that. So that can form a myriad of different things. And lots of different kinds of birds, from huge to small, came out of this one not too long ago. And I guess it's a bad time, but as good as any. And so whenever we taxonomy creatures that came and ended up, though they have somewhat convergence, meaning the similar outcome, a vine snake in Africa and a vine snake that's in South America, though they almost look exactly alike, are not even in the same genus. And in taxonomy of like fish, we'll go with this one. They have put fish into groups and hierarchies, basically saying what's related to ones and what's not related to ones. And this is just in fish. And you could almost say, well, there's humans, or primates, if you will, and then there's certain kind of primates, so there's a certain kind of fish. And in that certain kind of fish, there's variations on a theme across the planet. But in all these instances, this is given a different species name. And then if they're exactly the same thing, but variations on a theme, they put another nomenclature on it. Quite often you'll see CF dot, like commonly found as, commonly referred to as, this variation, where it's the Red Sea variation of this fish versus this variation of this fish that you can find, right? So if we can see that little amount of variation in fish, and just the variation from over here and over here, and this one has a yellow tail and this one has a blue tail, and they're separated by just a little bit, but other than that fact, they're almost genetically the same with a slight variation, they automatically give it a different species name. If it doesn't have enough variation, but it just seems to be somewhat in coloration, they at least separate it with a commonly found form, denoting that it's different. So we have Homo sapiens, but if you look at it, we have Homo sapiens sapiens. And oddly enough now, because of what they found, it's Homo sapiens Neanderthal. So it's just a variation on a theme, like Cro-Magnon was, but no, that's been absorbed now. That's just early European modern humans. What? Yeah, a lot has changed in the 50s ideal, and they're still pumping this thought in, but then people have found so much more. It's almost like whenever people found out for sure that the sun was at the center of the universe, there were still people that denied it. There's flat earthers today. Yeah, that scares some people. But let's just look into this and keep going. For I could go on about that, but I will go on at a later point. Central to results of this extensive examination of haplogroups, 7,556 different ones, and their variations, micro variation, was the absence of any African genes. So lacking was the sampling of African genetic involvement, or Negroid involvement, sub-Saharan if you will. The researchers stated in their introduction that the finding that the Europeoid haplogroups do not descend from African haplogroups, which are used A or B, is supported by the fact that bearers of the Europeid as well as non-all African haplogroups do not carry all these SNIs or SNPs, and the list is usually twice, three times this, but you can see this M91, P97, M31, P82, M23, M14, P262. I semi-recognize some of those and believe later we'll see those same ones, because I know that later in this it shows the, not even the full length one, but another one that adds more. And so this is one way of saying, well, look, here's these things that are major components that we figured out what they kind of relate to in genetics, and they don't even have this, and those over here don't even have this. So that's radically different. In fact, this is not the Desjardins self-intang where he has some scribbles on him, and the regular self-intang of the Indo-Pacific, which is almost the exact same thing. Variation on a theme over time is somewhat different and does get given a different name. Zebrasoma desjardini, right? Zebrasoma veliferum. And these are things denoting on fish, sometimes coloration, stripes, the way their tail looks, so on like that. It's amazing. You'll look at some of these fish and all the coloration and things about them, and what they denote is the white tail, leucosternin, things like that. And you're like, what? Well, if you look at the rest of them, this is the only one with a white tail. Yeah, but it's blue, so yeah, but they don't go off that. They're going off other things that they find unique about it. So sometimes even names can give us a problem with things. With the haplogroups not present in any African genes, and an absence of dozens of African genetic markers, it is very difficult or nigh on impossible to sustain any link to Africa. So in other words, they're saying the declamation of separation goes way back before that, and has been quite a split, more than people want to act like this is just, yeah, we've got a garden of roses, this one's kind of pink, this one's kind of red. No, this is a little more variation than that. The researchers are adamant that their extensive study offers evidence to re-examine the validity of the out of Africa concept. They see no genetic proof of substantiating an African presence in the Homo sapien tree. So what the genetics is showing is like, no, it didn't actually originate here necessarily. And all it really shows is that it originated more out here, and there was an in and out. And some of the earliest ins may have actually not gone back out, and others did and had reintegration back as things changed, and it showed a wild variance. So this just steps it back on the tree branch 1 or 2 steps and still shows the same type of thing with this off branch, and that's what it looks more like to these geneticists. Now, after we've had a chance to really look at the data versus taking a shot at it in the 50s off of what we knew in a much more elder times. So Russian geneticists also disproved this out of Africa claim, and a critical data point has emerged that disproves the out of Africa theory concept. Not one non-African participant out of more than 400 individuals in the project tested positive to any of 13 African subclads. And so these are variations of people in Africa, like the Khoisan and all this stuff, and subclads that are related to them, and nobody's related to anybody of that. So here it tells you the same numbers before in the things, but here it gives you a lot more numbers too. But they tell you that these are from haplogroup A and its subclads, and then it also adds on M60 and M181 and P90, which is from haplogroup B. This is common in sub-Saharan Africans. And these are all the people that ran through the study in 2012. We regard the claim of a more plausible explanation as a gross understatement, since there is absolutely nothing plausibly African turning up in any test tubes or any of the analysis. In fact, the researchers made note of their repeated absence, stating that not one non-African participant out of more than 400 individuals in the project tested positive to any of the 13 subclads of haplogroup A and its variations. Only remaining uncertainty relates to the identity of this more ancient common ancestor. All that can be stated with confidence is that humanity's ancestor did not reside in Africa. Unfounded accusations of course, racism have been common when dealing with this situation, as the prevailing Afrocentric hypothesis is constantly being challenged by the growing mountain of conflicting scientific evidence, especially in the evolving field of genetics. But if you look into the original, even out of Africa theory, no one was ever saying that all of humanity came from black people. In fact, the genetics, even in its earliest state, and forms of people were showing that. Darwin made a correlation by saying that Africans are the most primitive and most simian primate looking of people. That goes with the animals of Africa, and everybody else is related to primates and came out of it. So it looks like it goes da-da, and it's like, no, that's not exactly how it goes. And then as we get more and more into genetics, we find out, well, that's not at all how it goes. Again, when it gets to part 2, it'll be in your top left-hand corner when it comes up. Be at 45-minute mark. There have been extensive study on the topic of Neanderthals, especially over the last few years as archaeology digs, scientific projects, and newer technologies discover more and more of their remains, past dwelling places, and insight into their daily lives. Based on analysis not much study, scientists have even been able to determine that Neanderthals were about 99.7% human, and that if your heritage is non-African, you are part Neanderthal. And so what this study though showed, that Neanderthals were just like modern humans and not some freak creature. For the dwarves are really just the same kind of thing, but a little more stout, and man, they were strong people stuff, but just not quite as tall. Very capable individuals, but new studies have shown that they're really look like Chuck Norris and people that you would see around you all the time. And the strangeness of this, that it shows that Neanderthals might be something very much like a Cro-Magnon that had an integration of a small percentage of something else. Yeah, there's another thought on that integration. And then whenever we integrated with a Neanderthal, it gave us that component. We'll get into that further here. Let's go on. So basically, everybody out of Africa, everyone except for sub-Saharan Negroids, contain Neanderthal components. Strangely, though, from what you might think, it's a little stronger in the Orientals. Then there's a Denisovan component that runs through the Near East and Far East, really, as you will too. So there's more to it than meets the eye, because they're no longer around. If they were around, it probably would have been an easier deduction. Let's continue. Scientists have determined that some of the human X chromosome in modern humans, whose roots are non-African, actually originate from Neanderthals, and that only non-Africans carry about 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA based on these findings. It has not yet been determined whether to classify them as a separate species of humans or a subspecies of modern man, i.e. Homo sapiens, but it seems they've already kind of done it and set it to where it's now Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. But there's not a Homo sapiens negroidensis or Khoisanensis or anything, a variation of any others, which is what you would find in fish, what you would find in animals. In fact, if you look at something like a jackal and a coyote and a wolf, you would instantly probably think that's just variations on a theme, but lo and behold, they're not that closely related. And well, dogs are wolves, and it's like, no, they're not quite that related too. In fact, you would definitely show something like Canis chihuahuaensis, and that how radically different chihuahuaensis is than, say, Canis lupus, the common wolf, or Bane wolves being different from this wolf. And how you would think that, well, close to wolves is something like the snow dogs and all of that are that form, Samoyeds and so on. But no, not really at all. In fact, you can take that dog with some different hair on him and it's a golden retriever. Whereas if you made an all golden haired wolf, it's not that. But looks a lot like a German Shepherd. But then there are wide-snouted dogs and all this variation, but then again, they're just a dog. But we easily can tell them apart. So, declamations of race can get quite touchy sometimes, and it seems to be mainly because it's when we talk about us. For we can easily do this. And there recently was a paper out, and I used it as an example here 2 years ago in a thing, that they can find the difference between a jackal and a wolf, and they figured out that these aren't even the same thing as each other, and they thought they were, so it needs to be reclassified, and they were all up in it. And so if they can see something like that, whenever they see something far more great in variant and difference in humans, they'll want to do that because of that we're all one and everybody hold my hand thing. It seems they are not as dumb as people were once led to believe, Neanderthals. Studies of remains left by Neanderthals include bones and stone tools, but now There are evidence of them burying their dead and burial behavior, and it's really changed during my tenure go through here, that they really thought that, I mean, seriously, I hate to bust in just right here, but people were Ugg at 4,000, 5,000 BC, much going on, hunter-gatherers, and shortly before that they were Ugg, and that's what Neanderthal and Cro-Mags were, and dragging knuckles and everything, and it's like, no, in fact, not at all. In fact, you wouldn't recognize any difference between now and today, and Cro-Magnon had a larger brain, and so did Neanderthal, than the current human brain capacity, so it might even be a little different than that. No, were they shooting off rockets and going to the moon? No, idiot. But at the same time, that shows that they weren't Ugg, and the more we find out about them, it's amazing how they took what was before them Ugg and did what they did that led to what we have today. And you say Ugg, but you look at this incredible advancement that happened during their tenure in this 40, 50,000 back to 20,000 range, coming to the heart of the last ice age, coming out of it and disappearing conspicuously towards the end of the last ice age, and then boom, and then all of a sudden this happened out of it. And you think there can't be quick radical changes, but just a couple hundred years ago, people were on horses and doing things. You go back a few thousand years, there was only one group of people that were messing with horses and all kinds of things. And you look back at it, and then those people were doing all kinds of things all the way back through this point, as opposed to what was happening anywhere else. So they've, at first they didn't bury their dead, or they didn't do this, they didn't do that, and everything, and now, well, this shows, they did. Oh yeah, they were doing beadwork and things, they were doing quilting and stuff. In fact, they seemed multifaceted. One research showed that instead of having a person that was doing this task, and that person was doing this task, and that was doing this task, as we think of modernly, they were kind of well-rounded, it seemed more. So they had burial behaviors, and quite certainly are also including rituals, putting flowers with the dead and things like that we're still doing to this day. There are burial behaviors that go extremely long ago, and things that we still retain, like winged angels and stuff, that go back from theological standpoint from long, long ago. They were cooking though and stuff, cooking grains and vegetables as well as meats, in stomach linings, not unlike the method for making haggis and so on. Caring for the sick, having dogs as pets, speech and singing. Yep, singing, as well as evidence that they made and played bone flutes. There's been bone flutes shown that they're made them out of animal bones, and they're actually in tune. And that works with sacred geometry and things too. So it perhaps coming from a situation like that, they had it. Cro-Mags had it too. The modern scale. And that's a declamation of notes broken into tones that literally are semi-sections of each other to an exacting point. You can tell when somebody plays a wrong note. All the music we've been adhered to, all is based on these scales that go back an incredibly long time. They made and used flint tools so sharp that they're even sharper than surgeon scalpels and sharper than a razor that you have to shave with. And this is like obsidian tools, right? On top of that, to get to this, it's also been discovered that they were the ones responsible for the earliest carved stone figurines and earliest cave paintings from around 45,000 years ago, using perspective painting and drawing techniques not seen again until the 15th century European art movements. And they said, we have invented nothing. We're going to part 2 right here in the top left-hand corner. These are best shown in deep underground caves